Holocaust education is incapable of addressing contemporary anti-Semitism. In fact, in the total absence of any education about Jews alive today, teaching about the Holocaust might even be making anti-Semitism worse. So what is it that Holocaust education is failing to address, and how is that making things worse?
Yeah, so of course this article made a lot of people hate me.
Did it?
Well, I mean, in publishing.
Everybody who works in
Right,
Holocaust museums.
in publishing, we call that starting a conversation. It started a conversation. Well, it's funny. It did make a lot of people hate me initially. There was a lot, pushback from organizations and, because there's a lot of sunk costs in this.
Yeah.
But what's been interesting, actually, because it came out about 2 years ago at this point, and I now actually have a lot of Holocaust educators approaching me because I think, especially since October 7th, there's a lot of, people go into Holocaust education, have a lot of goodwill.
Of course.
And they see that what they're doing is not adequate to the moment. And I've had a lot of people coming to me now.
It's so important that you have helped challenge these assumptions.
Yes. And actually, I've now started a new nonprofit that's based on addressing this much more directly.
Oh, cool.
So I've spent about a year researching that article. I traveled around the country, and a lot of stuff didn't make it into the article, but interviewing people, a lot of whom didn't even make it in, and not just like, I wasn't just like walking around museums, like, attending, teacher trainings and, talking to people who create curricula for schools and, talking to people who design the museums and this sort of thing. And it was just so clear to me was how this was Holocaust was being extracted from any kind of historical, line.
Right.
And being used as a morality play.
Mm-hmm.
And the moral of the story is like, you should be nice.
Right.
And there's nothing before, nothing since. And what was amazing, like the point that hammers this home is I was at a teacher conference at the Dallas Holocaust Museum. And it was in July, so I didn't get to meet students in that context. And so I asked the docents there, what do the students typically ask when they come through this museum? And they said, you know what they'll ask? Are there still Jews alive today?
Wow.
Because if you went to this museum, you wouldn't know.
They thought all the Jews got killed and then the story's over.
Holocaust education, there's never Jews after 1945, except for Holocaust survivors who were talking about what happened between 1933 and 1945.
Right.
And that's it. Otherwise, there are no Jews after 1945. And, what's amazing is like, there's this concept in education philosophy called the null curriculum, like NULL, like zero.
Okay.
It's what's not taught in school. And the idea is that what's not taught in school is also part of the curriculum, because you're not telling students don't learn this. You're saying don't learn it from me. So, for example, like sex education a few generations ago, right? They didn't teach it in school. They weren't saying don't learn about sex. They were saying learn about it from your older brother.
Right.
Right? Don't talk to me about it. And, I just realized, like, there's, all these places around the country where it's required to learn about the Holocaust in school. And I want to be clear, I'm not against that. Like, it should be in all 50 states. Like, I'm not saying that it shouldn't be taught in school. But there's not a single place in this country where anyone is required to learn who Jews are.
Right.
And so what that means is that we've outsourced the job of teaching people who Jews are to TikTok.
Right.
Literally, when the only thing people know about Jews is that the Jews are people who died in Europe between 1933 and 1945, what the heck do they know about who Jews are? How can they process at all what's happening now?
Right.
If you don't even know who Jews are, you
have no context, you have no framework for understanding anything.
Like, you think Jews are a religion.
Right.
Right? Like, if you think Jews are a religion, and then you're like, why does a religion need its own country?
I think that's the number one misunderstanding about Jews
It's
today.
ridiculous. I mean, and first of all, there are many, many Muslim countries and many Christian countries.
Right.
But leaving that aside, like, Jews aren't a religion.
Right.
I mean, like, there's millions of Jews who are secular Jews. Have you ever met a secular Mormon?
Right.
Right? And, like, there's an answer to who Jews are. And it's quite simple. Like, we don't have to sit here and be like, oh, are Jews a race, a religion, and nationality? It's like, no. Jews are a type of social group that was common in the ancient Near East.
Right.
Very uncommon in the West today. It's a joinable tribal group with a shared history, homeland, and culture. What I just said was a paragraph in English, and in Hebrew, it's one word that's 2 letters long. Right? Jews are Am Yisrael. And unless you understand what that means, like, nothing else makes sense.
Right.
Right? Nothing else makes sense.
That's why it's the chief misunderstanding. It's sort of at the root of everything.
And it's just not that hard to teach. So this is actually so I have a new nonprofit that I just started.
What's it called?
It's called Mosaic Persuasion.
Okay.
It's a bit of an inside joke.
What's the joke?
Oh, so there's after the emancipation of Jews in Europe, so when Jews were starting to be given civil rights at the late 1700s, early 1800s, there was this idea that the only way that Jews would be entitled to civil rights would be if they renounced their collective identity. So in other words, you can't be part of the Jewish nation. You have to be like Frenchmen of the Mosaic Persuasion.
Of the Mosaic Persuasion.
Germans of the Mosaic Persuasion.
I've never heard that phrase before.
Well, I mean, because this concept failed.
Thank God.
Totally failed, right? I mean, because it did not work. So that's a little bit of an inside joke.
I
because
love that.
it's also, the purpose of this organization is to educate the broader American public about who Jews are.
How are you going to approach that?
So starting in K-12 education, because part of my experience with this panel at Harvard was really like, wow, college, too late.
Yeah,
way too late.
Those conceptions have already been formed.
And then also, after I'd written that piece about Holocaust education, having all these Holocaust educators approach me and being like, how can we improve? How can we change what we're doing? And also speaking around the country about my work and finding like just people constantly coming up to me and being like, can I get some follow on? Like, can you come and speak to my school or something like that? There was just this demand. And so, so we've just started as of our conversation right now, we don't even have a website yet. Hopefully we will very soon. Like that's how new this is. Like literally, just got off the ground, just got our first grant.
Amazing.
But we are doing right now we've run some pilot projects with a couple of different school districts where we're doing, teacher training workshops, which are about, it's foundations of Jewish civilization.
Can you tell me where those are in the country?
So we did one in Palm Beach County Public Schools for principals in that group, in that public school district. I didn't know this. Palm Beach County Public Schools to me sounds like Mar-a-Lago, ritzy Florida suburb.
Right.
It's actually the 10th largest school district in America.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's like actually, very diverse.
Yeah,
in
that
every
I would
way,
imagine.
Ethnically, racially, economically diverse. So we ran one of those workshops for them. We're doing a similar teacher training workshop for Miami-Dade Public Schools that's coming up. If you're a listener and you're an educator and are interested in this, please let me know. Because,
there you go. There's definitely a lot of educators who listen to this show.
So right now the way to reach me is just through my website at darahorn.com because we do not yet have a website for Mosaic Persuasion, but hopefully
maybe by the time this airs. So
possibly.
Check out Mosaic Persuasion.
Yes.
What I feel like is missing from Holocaust education, I feel like we're sort of emphasizing the wrong thing. I feel like all the emphasis is on the camps. It's like a car wreck you can't look away from. They're fascinating in a very, perverse way. And we're not emphasizing enough the buildup to the camps where, you had segregation like the American South for Jews, where you had, race defilement. Jews can't go to public swimming pools, can't have relationships with Germans, where police stand by as Jews get beaten, where there's complicity and participation by the whole community. I feel like that is what people need to engage with. Those are like everyday human things that other people can have a connection to in a very, thought-provoking, painful way. Where is all that? And what do you think of that take?
I think the problem is much bigger than that. I think that there's, again, this is sort of seen as this is like a thing that sort of like came down from the sky in 1933, and then went away in 1945. All the things that you described about, these social segregation and, this legalized discrimination, all of that was true in Europe for like centuries.
Right.
For Jews. Centuries. It was true in the Islamic world for centuries. That Jews have this, segregate. It was like, like a Jim Crow kind of status in the Islamic world. It was certainly, it was even more true in the Christian world. I mean, this was a very, very old phenomenon. There had been a very brief shift away from that only in Western Europe and only for a couple of generations. I mean, what people don't realize is like, this is not the first genocide of Jews even to have taken place in Europe.
Right.
I mean,
not by a long shot.
20 years earlier in the 1920s, there are 150,000 Jews murdered in what's now Ukraine in an explicit attempted genocide. And it's not unrelated to the Holocaust because then the survivors of that genocide flee to Western European capitals and they're, these are penniless refugees. And so there's a refugee crisis, which, helps makes it more possible to amp up popular sentiment against Jews because you have all these like homeless Jews on the streets,
Right?
In
All the riffraff.
Cities like Vienna. But the reason there are all these homeless Jews on the streets is because they're surviving. It's like when I say like a genocide in what's now Ukraine, this is during the Russian Civil War, like between 1918 and 1921, 150,000 Jews are brutally murdered, and whole towns are burned to the ground. I mean, this is like October 7th type.
Right.
Type violence, and sometimes even more organized than that, where people are being shot into mass graves. I mean, that had already happened. So that's a bigger problem. But to me, there's this like larger issue, which is even when you sort of stop the story in 1945 and nothing moves forward, right? It's like, if you go to the African American History and Culture Museum in Washington, you don't come out of this exhibit about American slavery and then, enslavements around the world, which is right. And then, it's like, there's an interactive, panel about, human trafficking today still exists. What are you doing to be an upstander to fight human trafficking? It's like, no, it's like that museum doesn't stop in 1865. It doesn't even stop in 1965.
Right. I think it'd be different if it was like, this is the slavery museum, right? Like I would maybe expect that it would end at the end of slavery. When you're going to a Holocaust museum, it's not necessarily a Jewish history museum, right? It's focused on a specific moment.
Which would be okay if there were Jewish history museums.
There's one in Philadelphia.
Yes, there is. Yes, the Weitzman. So I'm stepping away from it for a moment while I'm working on this nonprofit, but I was a creative advisor to the Weitzman Museum in Philadelphia.
We've had Stuart Weitzman on this show.
Yeah. So that's a great example of a museum that's really trying to tell a different kind of story. But even, the story of American Jewish history is like, frankly, it's kind of small, right, compared to the sort of like broad scope
we haven't been
of
here
Jewish
that long.
history. Yeah, well, I mean, and also like, this is, we're talking about thousands of years here, and this is a global people. Like, there's a lot to tell, and you're dealing with a broader American audience that like really knows, very, very little about any of this.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but what it sort of sounds like I'm hearing you say is that you're sort of rejecting the hyper focus on the Holocaust at all, and feel like it should be looked at only sort of within a broader context of Jewish history and not let's have 50 museums focused just on this one moment in time. Would that be accurate to say?
I think that focusing on that moment makes pattern recognition of anti-Semitism impossible because what it does is it defines anti-Semitism as
this one event.
Genocide of 6 million Jews in Europe between 1933 and 1945, and anything that isn't that
is not anti-Semitism.
Is totally fine.
Right.
There's a problem with defining anti-Semitism with the Holocaust, which is that, first of all, then you're talking about genocide, right?
Right.
And that's
that's the bar.
Right. That's the bar, exactly.